We are Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 reacting to the college football playoff rankings, which came out Tuesday night. As always, a special thanks to our presenting sponsor, Steaks. All right, Blake, the top 10 in order: Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU, LSU, Southern Cal, Alabama, Clemson, Oregon, Tennessee. What stands out to you first?
I mean, not a whole lot, right? I mean, it's kind of what you expected after Tennessee lost. Basically, everyone else is, kind of sitting in the spot that you expected them to be. Top four are the same because everyone's still unbeaten, and LSU moves up one. So, I don't doesn't really matter, right? Because if LSU loses another game, that's what it comes down to. Is LSU is sitting in that
Mhm.
five spot, and we know the setup for LSU. They have to win at A&M. They have to beat Georgia to get in, and they're, I think, like I said it before, at that point, their path to me would be secured because that would knock out, in my opinion, the loser of the Michigan Ohio State game. And if you assume TCU goes, because I still think Georgia's getting in, right? Like we've come to that conclusion, I
Yeah.
believe, at this point, barring just again a total um, embarrassing loss to LSU in the SEC championship, maybe, but I just think Georgia's getting in, and I think those other spots are still to be determined, depending on again what happens there. Obviously, the USC one is interesting, right? Because
Hmm.
they are still sitting there behind LSU, but again, I think it's for USC the formula is pretty simple as well. They have to win the Pac-12, and then they
Have
make
to beat
things a
Notre
lot
Dame.
more right. They got to beat Notre Dame, and then they got to win, the Pac-12, and so that becomes more of a fascinating discussion. I still think a lot of people are circling Chris number 7 and number 8 on the
Yep.
list, Alabama and Clemson, because they are both still there, and of course the Tennessee loss makes things a bit more interesting for that group. But um, I just the Alabama thing to me is, of course, we got a text last night from our friend Blaine,
Yes.
and he's like, "I'm putting it into the universe. Alabama is going to find their way into this thing. I think it's going to be difficult, but still, it's Clemson winning the ACC. Stranger things have happened at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit it crossed my mind too about Alabama. Were you surprised that Tennessee fell all the way down to 10? I thought that the Vols would be a couple spots higher.
No, I don't listen. I go back to the same thing I've said. It's how you win and how you lose,
You're
and
you're right about that.
I mean, think about it. Everybody's making a big deal about what they did to Missouri, and obviously it came back to bite them in the South Carolina one. But I whether we like it or not, the style points are a real thing, and when you get beaten the way they got beaten, um, like you said, I mean, it was 63-38, but really it's what 63-31, basically. I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's just
Yeah.
they got demolished. There's no reason, and it's the same reason. Like I said, I think some of us in our individual power rankings this week dropped Tennessee to fourth is because it's just the way they lost. Like it's an inexplicable loss, not just losing the game, but the way they lost. And so, not surprised at all that they dropped down this far. Because I honestly, I would have probably kept the teams that are ahead of them if I'd have made the rankings too, just because And I've been the high man on Tennessee all year, but it's how they lost is why they went so far down to the number 10 spot.
It feels to me like if Ohio State and Michigan is close, both those teams get in.
Yeah, I mean that's the setup I've been pushing for. In my
And I
wild.
don't think that's unfair. I think both those teams are very good. I know Michigan hasn't played much of anybody. I get that, but the defense has been so good. I mean, Michigan has beaten what, Illinois, Iowa, Maryland, all decent teams. Penn State is a sneaky good team. You're seeing Penn State, almost top five in some of the national computers. So I think that, look, I'm not going to say Michigan's schedule has been great, but I think it's maybe just a little better who they've beaten than given credit for.
Here's what I think is going to be interesting because we're talking about this game, right? And if Blake Corum doesn't play, um, which it seems to be what it's leaning towards, I believe, based on the quotes that are out there. That seems to be the thoughts. What if it? I mean, Ohio State wins big here, which again, this is a rivalry game. I think you you expect other guys to step up, and we don't know the official status. We're just kind of looking at. Obviously, you saw some of the stuff yesterday. Um, I think it was what was it? One of the offensive linemen had kind of said something about how they were going to step up with him out, which was not official at the time. So that would certainly, I think, put a kind of, I don't know, in making that a close game, maybe because I think if he doesn't play, that could be, Ohio State is out for they're out for blood here because in this kind of game, we know how that works. So, yeah, it's very important though. Like you said, I think if you're Michigan and you lose the game, I think you have to keep it close because of the schedule and those kind of things that are going to factor into this. And then again, that's where the LSU, USC, even a Clemson, debate comes in, especially if all of those are conference champions, or if two of the three are conference champions, or however you want to split it up. Then that gets more interesting. Which again, we're assuming that Georgia and TCU, if TCU wins out, they're going to get in, and of course Ohio State would get in that scenario. So yeah, that would make that last spot a lot more intriguing.
Well, LSU at 5 is very interesting too. I mean, not that that's like we've said all along. If LSU beats Georgia, we thought that the SEC would probably get 2 teams in. So I mean, it's not surprising in that sense, but to see it in
Well, I
print
mean, I
on your
think we got to
screen,
remember this, right? Like LSU's lost 2 games, but let's like one of those games was week 1, and as a
yeah,
long
to
time
a
ago.
really good Florida State team.
Yeah, I mean, to a ranked Florida State team now, and so that was a long time ago. And I think when we look at it, like we said, sure, they're not going to get in if they lose 3 games. Even if they lose to A&M and win the SEC championship, they're not getting in. But still, like that's one loss was so long ago. And of course, you do have the Tennessee loss. How they lost that one is kind of glaring, though. So I think that's important. But it is. I mean, I think there is. They have 2 top 10 wins, right? They've beaten Ole Miss, they beat Alabama. And so I think that's kind of what it comes down to here. And I just think it's the SEC is what the SEC is, and yeah, I mean, I'm sure USC fans are wondering why they're sitting behind LSU, but at the same time, I just look at LSU, and I said that weeks ago. I thought that if this team wins out, they are going to get in. We can talk about how, 2-loss team hasn't made it and all that. Like they're going to be the one to do it if they win out. Like there's no question about it anymore. So yeah, I think that's just kind of it's going to be an interesting setup because again, that's you got a lot of work to do to make that a reality because winning at A&M. Not saying it's going to be easy, but obviously LSU's the favorite there. But then beating Georgia in the SEC championship, now that's going to be a tall task, I think. So.
Well, the other interesting thing is seeing USC at 6 right now. And I say right now because we have noted that the bulk of USC's work was in front of it in terms of the good wins it could have because last week it was you need to beat UCLA. Well, they did that. Now it's need to beat Notre Dame, which is a better team. This is a top 20 team in the computers. So that's a good win. And then the Pac-12 still has not been decided. Let's see, right now it's down to they would play Oregon, Washington, or Utah, any of which would be good wins. Probably beating Utah or Oregon would be more impressive. But you do wonder if what the committee is saying too is, like USC at 6 right now, if it were to win 2 more of those games, I think, man, there's just really still is a lot of things. There are a lot of things that are unclear because I think if USC wins a couple more of that magnitude, I'm sure it's not going to sit there at 6.
Well, here's all you need to know. This is a direct quote from Boo Corrigan, the committee chair. This is from an ESPN article here. That's what he said last night. Quote, it came up over and over again to make sure, and there's reasons for both teams, but the committee at the end of the day saw the wins over Alabama and Mississippi as stronger than the wins over UCLA and Oregon State. One area we still have questions on is the strength of the defense of USC, and looking
Yeah.
at it in its entirety, we believe that LSU deserved to be ranked 5 and SC 6. End quote there.
Yeah.
So there you go. I mean, that spells it out plain as day. That's the reason why they are ahead of them. And again, I think for USC, like we've said, the formula is clear. They they have to win out, I think, to be in there. And even then, like we said, an LSU winning out makes things more challenging. Then you've got the dynamic of the Michigan Ohio State game, I think, and how that plays out. So, I mean, yeah, this is it's. I think USC is one that, again, you know, obviously, if you're USC, you're certainly rooting for an LSU loss, because an LSU loss anywhere, any way you slice it, A&M or Georgia, and you win, you're moving ahead of LSU. You know that for sure. And I don't
Yeah.
think anyone else is going to jump USC in that scenario, because we see the teams that are behind them. I don't see a scenario where Clemson jumps USC. I mean, am I wrong on that? I think, assuming, let's say, both teams, went out, we see it now. Like, USC is going to be ahead of Clemson, I think, in that regard. So, yeah. So, I mean, USC is sitting in they're not sitting in the best spot, but they're still in a pretty decent spot. Again, if you're assuming, and like we said, I don't know what the number would be, assuming LSU beats Texas A&M. I mean, Georgia's probably going to be I don't want to say significant favorite against LSU, but I wouldn't be shocked if that number is what, Chris, double digits. So I just think that's kind of what your expectation is, heading into how this thing plays out here. So,
How do we get Alabama to the playoff?
well, here's how we get Alabama to the playoff. All right, here's what has to happen.
Had to ask.
So LSU has to lose. That's 100% certainty, because that takes one out of the equation. USC has to lose, right? That takes USC out of the equation. I think Clemson has to lose, because that takes Clemson out of the. Because I think Clemson, as the ACC champion, would jump Alabama. Do you agree with that? If Clemson wins out,
I would think. I mean, Alabama's got one game left. Clemson's got South Carolina and
then
whoever is in the other side. I'll look that up while you're speaking.
You had to poll me on divisions with the ACC. I couldn't tell you.
Yes,
I always forget
I'm
how
right there with you.
The coastal and whatever works. But no, I mean, that's here. If you're Alabama, I think this is what you're rooting for, and someone will point this out.
North Carolina is who they're going to play.
There you go. So here's what I think you're rooting for. You're rooting for Georgia to win out and beat LSU. You're rooting for Ohio State just to clobber Michigan. Like, I think you're rooting for that. You're obviously rooting for a TCU loss. But even in that scenario, TCU could still win. And then you're talking about that fourth spot, maybe. But I think that's it. Alabama is rooting for LSU to lose, USC to lose. I think Clemson would jump them as the ACC champion. So I think you have to root for Clemson losing to North Carolina or South Carolina. One of the Carolinas needs to step up and beat Clemson if you're an Alabama fan. So you're rooting for a lot of stuff to happen. And it's still going to be a challenge, because I think that's where things will get interesting, is putting, if it does come down to that 2-loss Alabama versus 1-loss Michigan, or Ohio State. I think Ohio State, and you can tell me what you think about this. I think a 1-loss Ohio State has a better chance to get in than a 1-loss Michigan. You agree? You have to, I think that's right.
Yeah, that's the perception.
Yeah.
I mean, the computers all like Ohio State better. Ohio State's best wins: Penn State, Notre Dame, Iowa, Wisconsin. That's their 4 best. That's better than Michigan's 4 best, which right now looks like Penn State, Iowa, Maryland, Illinois, and believe Ohio State got Penn State on the road, whereas Michigan's was at home. So yeah.
Yeah, it's again. So for Alabama, let's just call it what it is. It's an uphill climb, but as we always say, never count it out just yet, because wild things happen in these final couple weeks, and I think the impact of the championship games will be a big part of this. But I also think, this week in particular, given the rivalry matchups, there is a lot that can still be determined here. So.
All right, Blake, I'm going to challenge you with one final question. Let's come up with an ultimate chaos scenario.
I got it.
Which would involve getting Alabama in.
All right.
Before we do that, a shout out to our sponsor, Stakes. You can predict sports better than the crowd. For a chance to win NFTs with Stakes, players can cement their sports predictions against friends, other fans, and influencers forever. Don't let your sports genius go overlooked. Join Stakes and have the best predictions captured in the moment. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Use our invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. Okay, chaos scenario. I would think that would have to include Georgia beating LSU, Ohio State, Michigan loser getting blown out, and that's probably needing to be Michigan losing in that case. We on the right track here?
Good so far.
USC would need to lose somewhere,
Yep.
preferably in the title game. TCU would need to lose one or both.
Yeah. I think that's the one. Here's where the interesting part gets. If TCU loses a game, where does TCU go? Because does would one loss TCU stay ahead of one loss Clemson? I think so.
Yeah, I do too. And here's the weird thing about TCU's resume. I mean, like all the wins have been okay, at least. I mean, the only team that TCU's played that's just awful is Colorado.
I think their
Even
strength.
Iowa State, which is I think a 4-6, 4-7 team, whatever Iowa State is ranked top 40 in the computers. I mean, the Big 12 is a pretty good league, top to bottom.
ESPN's got strength of schedule. TCU's 35. Clemson is at 56. SOR at strength of record, right?
Strength, or resume.
TCU's number 1 in that. So
yeah,
Clemson's number 6. So I think that's, and again too, it matters who you lose to, right? Because TCU's got who they got left. They've got
TCU has got Iowa State, and then the championship game has
that been determined yet? Who they play?
I'll look that up while you're analyzing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's. I think that becomes the more interesting question maybe now. Is it before? I think we thought if TCU lost, they would not be in. But I think that was in the Tennessee part of the discussion, assuming Tennessee was going to win out. But now, when you look at what's behind them, which again, I mean, USC can factor into this. But we're doing the scenario that USC loses a game, then I think that's where the interesting part gets.
Okay, it's going to be Kansas State or Texas. Kansas State wins this weekend, and it will be in. So there you go.
I don't know. There's another one to circle as a storyline. What happens to a one-loss TCU? Do they hold on to that final spot? It's all going to depend on what happens around them. But the Alabama chaos scenario, there's a lot, but don't count Alabama out just yet, because I do think there is still a pathway for the Crimson Tide. And what do you know, Chris? I think if they get in, and with the way all the scenarios would have to fall, it would be Georgia versus Alabama as the 1 and 4.
Hey, let's do this. Let's just call chaos across the board and just make it your traditional playoff with Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson.
That's exactly what I was thinking about last night. I was like, somehow we're going to wind up with these 4 in there. Like, I don't know how it's going to happen, but somehow. I don't know though. Like I said, I'm sold on TCU. I think TCU, assuming they don't lose. Assuming they don't lose to Iowa State. If they lose in the Big 12 championship, maybe. I still think that TCU has done enough to be there with an argument. But Georgia, Alabama, we don't have a rooting interest here, but if we're talking about what's best for business, my goodness, give us Georgia and Alabama in the college football playoff. So and LSU, give us LSU in there.
Let's take all 3. Let's just
give us all of them. Yeah.
Let's get Tennessee back in there too. Let's have an all SEC playoff.
I can't wait till we expand this playoff and the Final Four is an an all SEC Final Four. I can't wait to see what the reaction is to that, because it's going to happen once we expand this playoff.
Well, and look, here's another thing. An expanded playoff this year, you got a lot of teams going into last weekend with a lot of stuff to play for. Like suddenly Tennessee is like, okay, we're not out of this yet. There's a lot of thought that what Tennessee team is going to show up in Nashville to face Vandy.
Notre Dame would have a lot to play for. Notre Dame's 15.
Notre Dame would have a lot.
Utah
would have a lot to play for. Penn State.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right. Thanks for watching. We've got some basketball stuff coming up. We have our live streams every Wednesday night, so be sure you watch that. Best way to catch all that, hit that subscribe button. So anyway, thank you for watching us here at Southeastern 14, and we'll see you again soon.